Hey, good stuff. Hey, Paris, nice to see you.
Hi, Venessa. So good to see you after so long. Wow.
I know. You look fantastic. You look like you're sitting in paradise somewhere.
Kind of, sort of. People call it the same. So good to see you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. For me, it's a personal thanks from my side because, I think I have been in touch with you when I had nothing, no clue where I was going. And today we have something all together. Everyone has built it. And you are here again to drop some knowledge bombs and lot of wisdom. So thank you so much. And hey everyone, Mike, good to see you. Thanks for joining in. I guess Manohar is all about to join, who is the host for today. And
it's a massive pleasure to come back, and I would probably say something a little bit like this if I was just being polite, but I'm being serious here when I say it's so impressive to see what you've built. It's been completely rewarding and inspiring to watch it happening, and to have met you all earlier in the process, and to see you carving out your own space with your own voice, and interacting and sharing knowledge amongst our global community of peers in practice, but absolutely putting your own mark on the practice, which is as it should be. And you've done a fantastic job. And I know it's just, onward and upwards. So, and having finished my own journey here in Australia, I know how hard it is. I really do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being there. She has been like a rock stone for me. And I guess while the community folks journey I was starting, I guess she was one of the person whom I used to ping and took help or seen like a North Star to me, okay, things has to be done just like the things they have created. So amazing, and so lucky and grateful to have you here. And I'll not be taking much of the stage today because it's the place for Manohar. And a big shout out to Akash. If you guys can see him, the boy has been working a lot hard. And then my another teammate and community folks, a person, Sangeeta, as well, who has reached out and who has been making sure this whole series just done like a smooth whatever smooth things are, the river or the sea or the ocean. But I guess she has been doing a lot of effort in making this work and bringing this ritual of rather than moderators or the community leads are hosting the event, but the members are coming up and hosting the events within the community and bringing that sense of belonging. So I guess that's a beautiful initiative. So thanks Sangeeta, thanks Akash, thank you Manohar, and big thanks to Venessa and everyone joining in. I guess Venessa, we can hold for a while, maybe 2 more minutes, and we start with then you can start. Meanwhile, Manohar, we would really like to see your face, and it's been again a while to see you. I would really like to. There he is. So let me put some word for Manohar also. And sorry guys, this was I don't know I was there in the plan or not, or do this or not, but I'm just taking the space because that's what my bad habit is. And Manohar, Vanessa, I'm sure you will love this conversation which you're gonna have with Manohar, because he's a kind of person who is just so amazing when you get into a conversation with him. He understands his words really perfect. He knows what he's speaking, and the way he frames things, the way he frames sentences, I guess I'm a big fan of him. He creates poetry out of anything. So he's a big time magician of words, one of the person I really admire. And I'm really glad, before this only I just sent a shukriya, a thank you to Manohar as well. Before this event I said thank you for doing this for all of us. And so glad, Manohar, shukriya bahut bahut. And Akash, if there is anything we have to pitch in, else we can just kickstart this.
No, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining in, and let's give the stage to Manohar.
So first of all, I want to release a secret that when Paras told me, he asked me, how should we pay you? And then I told him, say good things about me in the beginning of the meet, and just say things that are exaggerated and too much nice. So I think he has done his job very well. And that's a brilliant note to start this conversation. I think I was just thinking Wednesday, 2:30 p.m. center of the week, center of the day, at least for most of the attendees. Venessa, the weather in Mumbai from last 2-3 days has been very breezy, and I was looking forward to this warm conversation. The topic itself, Chronicles of Community Builders, I think that states that it's not really a seminar or a workshop, but more like learning from the experiences and life of community builders, which can inspire other people besides informing them. And I think in India, at least, or for that matter, almost all of the world, the best conversations start from something called Aur Kya Chal Raha Hai. So I would like to begin today that what has been keeping you busy, Venessa, for these days from last many months?
What has been keeping me busy? It's a really good question. Probably to a degree, I think like most of us in the world, just kind of finding my own way through the unusual times that we're living in, you know, sort of finding how to keep my own head above water, making sure that I'm working really hard on self-care to look after myself, because if I don't look after myself, there's no way I'll be able to look after anyone I have in my duty of care, any of my community constituents, and I won't be my best self. I won't be doing my best work either. But also looking out for, you know, my family, my friends, my neighbours, all my communities offline and online through this time. So that is very front of mind all the time, as I think it is for most of us, and my own relationship to those self-care practices and trying not to get too exhausted and figure everything out. From a work perspective, I am doing my PhD. I've been doing it for a couple of years, so that's always taking up a bit of time in the background, never as much as I should be working on it, I will say. And that is on artificial intelligence and online communities, and looking at how we build community in an age of algorithmic culture and how that changes, how that both may support but also hinder and get in the way of human-centered community building. So there's that work, a lot of academic work, a lot of teaching, and of course my sort of work with AASW, which is our national organisation of community practitioners, much like your own. And so we have quite a bit happening at the moment. I'm deep in the getting ready stages of a lot of things. So I'm organising a bunch of masterclasses, events, already starting to think about our annual conference Swarm, which isn't till August, but I'm determined to get a jump on it this year. And all the sort of stuff we want to do this year, research projects. We've got lots of projects on the boil, as you do. So it's just kind of getting back into it after a short break. I will say, I'll give you an example of my day. Today, I finished off a strategy for a client. I did some work for ACM, and then I worked with a couple of ACM members to finalise a submission to our government on a online communities and safe social media inquiry that's happening. So we do quite a bit of this government submission, government consultation style work where we represent the voice of the industry. So that's really kind of an odd bunch of stuff. So in any given day, I could be talking to people in startups, students at university, politicians, all sorts of different people. So it's a bit of a snapshot. And they're hanging out with my cat, of course.
And I think while you're immersed in so many variety of things, how do you like to introduce yourselves? If I ask you, introduce yourself in one line, how would you do that?
Right. Okay. Let me think. I would say, and you'll have to forgive my probably butchery pronunciation, Nahai koi mere jaisa mere naam hai Venessa.
Brilliant.
Nice.
I'm sorry if that was really bad.
No, it was fabulous. And I think all of us have received that message, which was important. And I think that is what was special about this conversation. Indeed, when you look at Venessa's work and profile, there is a lot of unique things which are different from a very traditional community manager. I would say that the role of community manager is itself getting evolved. And there is less like a traditional community manager. But in case of Venessa, there are very interesting hyperlinks I would like to open in the course of our conversation. And the most fascinating for me is to begin from the aspect of governing communities. How does governance in a community particularly look like? And Venessa has some very brilliant insights about the notion of governance in a community, as well as how do you operationalize that governance. So Venessa, what has been your observations about how people govern their communities, and what are some best practices around that?
Thank you for the question. It is something I care a lot about. I think that governance is a topic and a word that is often seen as not very sexy, and for some it's very dry and boring. And I think that's a misconception. I think it's actually the heart of community building, is because it's always about context, how we identify ourselves, what do we stand for, what are our values, where do we draw our lines, what behaviors do we elevate, what behaviors do we discourage, and why, and how does that connect with what we're trying to do when we convene a group of people. So I actually think it's core to community building, but I think it's seen as a kind of rules and boring and all the rest of it. And I definitely think over the years it has not got a lot of love for various reasons. Your question was about how people govern them. I mean, I see there's an incredibly diverse array of approaches out there, which is good. I think, there is no one right way to do this. I will say that because I've been in the community space a long time, I've been in it about 25 years now. So it's interesting you say not traditional, because I think of myself as a very ultra traditional community manager, like the old school community manager. And now it's evolved into a multi-headed different beast, which is really exciting. But I think of myself as ye old world community manager, sort of, I was doing this sort of stuff in like the early 90s, and big forums and virtual world and BBSs and IRC channels, so I'm really ancient in the scheme of the internet. But I think what's interesting about governance is that the core principles that we need to operationalize for good governance haven't really changed a lot. Obviously, technology's evolved dramatically, and it has made certain aspects of the work of governance far more challenging, including things like the rise of algorithms, sort of algorithms that intervene in the way that people experience a space digitally, socially, the way that people might discover other people, the way that they connect, the way that they might post content, the way that content is surfaced, the way they engage. Those things are now mediated by algorithms in a way that they weren't, 20 years ago. So that's one factor that's changed how governance works. But then, of course, there's, technology itself, and whether we're on private platforms, public platforms, platforms and businesses that have very specific commercial agendas that may or may not line up with the community we're trying to build. And sometimes that can be really problematic. So certainly you see on some of the big social platforms, commercial logics and agendas around surveillance capitalism that even if they don't necessarily bother us as an individual, they might result in the technology behaving in ways that drives behaviors that don't accord with the community we want to build. So, it's not as straightforward as sort of showing up and doing the human work of governance anymore. So there's much more of a technological component that we as micro governors of these spaces need to kind of think about. In terms of best practices, I think, for me, it's always about, I always think of governance as, I guess, on a few different levels around organising identity, value sets, the behaviours and outputs that we want to produce together. So as I said earlier, it really touches everything, right down to how we might think about identity in a community, how we think about information, what knowledge we want to, upvote, for lack of a better term, can I, elevate, promote in the community versus others, the kinds of social roles we need in a community, all those sort of things. And ultimately, for me, it's about creating a condition set. I use the gardening metaphor quite a lot. I much prefer it to the party host metaphor, which I think is really quite destructive in some ways and a bit egocentric. So I like it. I think of it like a garden, right? Where you got to pick the right season. You got to choose the plants very carefully. Some plants commingle very well and pair very well. Others don't. You got to water it. You got to get the right amount of sun. You're going to have weeds and pests you got to get rid of. That's going to happen in nature. It happens in communities too, obviously. So governance is the gardening work, right? Which is the good and the bad. So it's promoting the good. This is a very simplistic way of thinking about it, making more of the good things happen and minimizing the risk of the bad things happening. And when they do happen, should they happen, dealing with them in a way that is safe and constructive and cohesive with that community's culture and intention, if that makes sense. When I think of things like moderation, which I also think of as incredibly critical to any community, and I don't believe that communities moderate themselves. I do believe, because I've seen it happen, communities that have been set up well and managed well over some time can grow to have a membership that is very proactive in self-moderation, absolutely, to the point where the community manager or professional moderators may need to do very little. That's great. That's as it should be. But there always does need to be some oversight, and particularly if we're talking about, depends on the sort of community, right? If you're talking about a brand community, it's a very different proposition. You've got commercial risks and regulatory considerations, not just psychological safety, not just the culture of the space you're building. So ultimately, I think of as moderation as sort of two dimensions for me. It's regulatory. So in Australia, we have this really intense regulatory environment. I know that you're contending with versions of the same thing where you are. We've got a whole bunch of legislation around what people can and can't do online, a new Online Safety Act that came in late last year that affects the governance of online communities. So that's another thing. Community managers here often feel like they're mini lawyers sometimes without the salary because we have to, we have to be moderating things like defamation, contempt of court on a daily basis on social media. So it's regulatory, hate speech, defamation, all those sort of legal matters, harassment, etc. But it's also cultural. Moderation is cultural. So there are behaviours that we will stand for, not stand for, reward, incentivise, disincentivize. They're about who we are, which have nothing to do with what's legal or not legal, right? The simplest example I can think of is a community where swearing is totally okay because it's the nature of the community, it's the people that are in it. It might be a community of practice of folk who happen to swear a lot in their daily life, and it's fine. It actually becomes part of the community vocabulary and their sort of shared rituals and social norms. It's fine. Whereas in another community, completely inappropriate, completely taboo, and can actually harm psychological safety for some of the participants. So it's thinking about what makes psychological safety from that cultural point of view and that social relational point of view. And then of course, all the other stuff around, what do we need to, what's the minimum we need to do from a legal point of view? But I do firmly believe that everyone that sets out to build a community or to take over the ownership of a community, anyone in that position of hosting a community has a obligation, an ethical obligation to ethical governance. It has to sort of reflect on what that looks like. And it doesn't necessarily need to be 1,000 documents and formal things and, big legal tomes, but you do need to have a position on it. You need to take a position and be proactive in it, not just reactive, because reactivity is to a large extent got us into the position that we're in with some of the, the problems that we see on those large platforms. Sorry, that was a really long answer. I'll stop now.
I think it was a long and deep answer. There's so much of insights there. And I want to particularly understand how has the environment in Australia contributed to this thinking. And you're uniquely positioned because majority of time when we think of the community landscape, it's US and UK that comes to prominence. And I think there are certain unique characteristics about the Australian ecosystem. So help us understand what is unique about the Australian ecosystem and how has that helped you think about governance particularly? Because nobody else talks about it. Majority of people think about operations. Majority of other people use words like administration and other things. But when you really start thinking about it as governance, it really makes you more responsible one. And also it's more long-term, deep, and like the metaphor you gave of governance. So please help us understand what is Australia offering to the world and how it has contributed to your thinking.
Let's just not talk about tennis right now. It's a sore spot. No, it's a really interesting question, Manohar. Thank you. I think something I've neglected to mention, is that, again, when we think of governance, we automatically, I think, reflexively think of it as this, the way we do in society. So we think of it as institutionalized. It's very top-down, hierarchical, like I'm the community manager or the boss or the moderator or the admin or whatever I'm called. And it's my job to, moderate and manage this community top-down, looking down. Where, of course, there are really a wide berth of models of governance, really awesome participatory governance models. We see the rise right now. It's not really a new concept, but the latest incarnation of decentralized autonomous organizations, which actually really kind of resonates with some very old ideas about participatory governance. And, these different kind of community constitution style models of things, social contracts. So, there's a lot of ways you can do it. So I don't want to suggest that it always needs to be ultra formal. Far from it. In fact, most of the time that's not going to be very effective. Let's be real. Australia is in an interesting position. So I won't go into too much detail about us culturally, but I guess we have a reputation for being a bit of what's called a nanny state in some ways. sometimes in areas that, in areas that people think we shouldn't, and then ironically not in areas that maybe we should, like COVID management, but that's a whole nother story. Which means really, it's sort of a motherhood or fatherhood, sort of paternalistic, state where, they don't trust the citizens. So we need to ban everything, right? We need to make rules for everything. We need to really spell it out. Everything needs to have fines and consequences. And look, I'm a fan of some of that. I think that, there are extremes, and I think that there's certain rules and governance we have that I think are really good. But then there's other stuff that, can go a bit far. So we've got, culturally, we have this DNA of being this nanny state where we like to sort of, we've got to keep a watchful eye. It's like the government has a nanny cam and is looking at the people going, are you all right? Do I need to check in on you? Can you handle yourself on the internet, or do I need to help you out? So that extends to social media and the internet. Now, interestingly, Australia's in this interesting position because it's sort of it's a right size to be a petri dish, to be an example and an experiment for a lot of people. We're obviously nowhere near as big as the US. We're big geographically, but we're only 25 odd million population, which is not tiny, but it's not large. So it's a really good size to run experiments. And I'm not saying they think of them this way, but that's effectively what they become. So Australia has been involved in a lot of policy and regulatory experiments that are basically acting as a test for the global market, including with social media. And you see social media platforms like Facebook, notably, doing things to their audience and users in Australia, that testing things out here first, and doing things like the news ban that they did earlier in 2021, which actually took quite a lot of government sites offline, quite a lot of not-for-profit sites offline. It wasn't just news. They almost wiped out half of the country's Facebook to prove they were proving a political point, and they were sort of, pulling their mafia cell tactics. But they wouldn't do it in the US, right? It's too big a deal. But we're a good sized market for them to test it and just see what happens without too much fear factor. So consequently, we have the government here is we have a conservative government at the moment. It's been conservative government for a couple of decades, and they do like to. They're not comfortable with some of the free speech affordances of the internet in general, I would say, and I'm trying to say that as apolitically as I can. I think they might not phrase it that way, but that's definitely what's happening. So they have increasingly been adopting legislation that seeks to restrict that speech in various ways. In some ways, many of us think are necessary, right? So to curb horrible harassment, non-consensual image sharing, lots of really abhorrent things that happen online. So they're responding to that, which I think is a good thing. But then they're also, very, very focused on things like defamation in particular. So Australia is the defamation capital of the world. And defamation has become such an issue for social media managers, online community managers here, that so much so that we had to create native kind of one-of-a-kind training for that last year that we launched. It's on-demand training available through our website. Anyone can do it, but it gives, whether you're a volunteer community manager or a professional, because the law applies to everybody. Anybody can get sued. Everybody is liable for this, regardless of their professional status. We wanted to just make this available to help people out, to build up their confidence and get them across what's happening. So there was a decision, two recent milestones. Sorry, I know I'm talking a lot again. A couple of years ago, and then on appeal last year, a decision called Voller versus Nationwide. But basically, this was a decision in court that the upshot of which was anybody that maintains a presence on any social media platform, including owned communities, but they're less aware of them, but it does technically extend to them, is liable for all of the user content in that space. Not the social media company, the person maintaining the presence. So if I'm a small business, or if I'm a giant company, and I have a Facebook page and a group and I don't know, YouTube channel, something else, anything my users post, I am liable for if there is a legal issue. Now, the legal issue they're most concerned about, and the legal issue this case was about, was defamation. So if a user posts something defamatory, me, my organization, and the community manager, potentially, can be pulled into court and named in that liability. I've actually served as expert witness in a couple of court cases here where this stuff has happened, and it's increasing quite a lot. So I think it's gonna, I don't think it's gonna go on indefinitely, but so off the back of that, this Online Safety Act was introduced, and now at the moment there's a new social media inquiry. All of this basically leads to an environment where a lot of businesses are getting too nervous to even do anything on social media, you know, which is obviously too far, and I think a negative consequence. A positive consequence of some of it is that people are starting to think more about moderation and governance. They're not thinking that they can just have it all. We have a lot of businesses here, as you may as well, who think they can kind of barrel into social media or online communities, extract value, and not really take any responsibility about what happens. So if, let's say, somebody's harassing somebody in their community, they're like, well, that's terrible, but that's not my problem, really, is it? You know, whereas here, that's on us. And I think it actually should be, in my view. So whilst I'm not a fan of the politicized aspect of some of this legislative development, which is very much about protecting politicians, people in the public eye from defamation in particular, I am a partial fan, at least, of some of the other developments that are trying to build in some accountability for the more abhorrent acts we see online, and the either businesses or platforms that allow them and look the other way.
I think so much of food for thought there for the world, for all of us, and greater onus on community managers, I think, is very essential. It's like, I think all of us are in some way Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility, and we have to acknowledge that.
Yes.
But I want to understand another thing, that you have made a very unconventional point at some point when I was listening to your podcast with David on the Masters of Community, and both of you were talking about how even if there are fundamentalists and extremists, and guys, hear me out, I think this is a very unconventional point of view, and sometimes people may get triggered with that, but I think it's very essential to understand there is some nuance there. You have a view that even if it's a fundamentalist group or an extremist, for that matter, Nazis or other forms of extremists, they create some sort of solidarity and community, and they use certain tactics and strategy, which is valuable for all of us. So even if you might ideologically disagree with them, there is room for understanding how they are doing it and what you can learn about it. So when did this thinking arrive for you, and what have you learned from these groups?
That's a brilliant question, and I agree with you, and I know it's confronting to think about that in some ways. I did a paper early last year with two other amazing scholars, and I'll find a link to the paper to share with you. But we were examining, in this case, men's rights activist communities on Reddit, the more extremist, the more violent ones, because there's a very wide spectrum of you know, folks that identify in that way. And we were looking first of all at the way they were, the toxicity algorithm was working in Reddit, but we were also looking at, adjacent to that, we were measuring their sense of community. So we were running classic sense of community measures, you know, good old Macmillan and Chavis, full on kind of community health check style. We were coding posts through all these communities. Obviously, you know, it's not quite the same if we're not a member of the group, but with an external eye, we coded all these posts and found that all of them pretty much, they varied a bit, but they all had a strong sense of community. And if you ignore the subject matter for a moment, because some of it was quite violent and extreme subject matter, you would say those are really successful communities. They were massively supportive of one another. There was so much trust, there was social capital, there was influence and agency and group identity and all these wonderful social norms and shared language, and peer support was just huge, right? We had there was actually a lot of airline pilots in one, and they were sort of helping each other get promotions, and there was, you know, people going in there talking about their mental health issues, and they were supporting each other to be safe and vulnerable. And then they turn around and, you know, say something quite violent and extremist, because that was, after all, the core purpose of the group. But objectively, they had a strong sense of community. So there's that sort of stuff, which, and I think what we've got to start looking at, especially for anyone who's interested in those sort of groups and understanding these dynamics and these communities around the world right now, we've got to look at them as healthy communities, and how we can, if you're interested in pushing back on that, how do you unpack that health then? How do you start to detangle it can you, rather than, I mean, it's not really that different from the kind of work that, deprogrammers and de-radicalization specialists do. And I'm not by no means an expert in that, but from what I understand, it's similar, right? You'd work on minimizing that sense of belonging or undermining it in various ways, or offering a counterpoint sense of belonging, right? You have to have a substitute. You can't, someone's getting belonging and influence and membership and all these things from this group. You can't just sort of say, oh, that's really wrong and evil, and expect them to jump ship. You've got to offer at least an alternative, and perhaps, work on somehow undermining the effectiveness of those qualities in that group. If, maybe that's something that anti-terrorism folk can do in the future, right? Sort of hack communities that way. So there's that sort of stuff. And then, some of the folks behind, particularly misinformation groups and things like that, are incredible community managers. They are so well organized. They're amazing, particularly at network building, at scaling and amplifying their reach. And I've only done a little tiny bit of digging into this space, and I've seen how organized they are and how you can trace back things to where things started, and watch the ripple effects that they generate through, they're not spending a ton of money on this stuff. Some have a bit of budget, most don't. It's just, their skills with the tools that they have, and building out those relationships, and understanding people and looking for vulnerabilities, and understanding how they can kind of optimize people's fears, people's vulnerabilities, those sort of things. So it's the dark matter side of community building, but it is really what they're doing in a lot of ways. Yeah. So I think there's a lot to learn from them. Certainly behaviors we don't want to emulate. And it's important to remember that unto themselves, they don't consider themselves toxic. They may be toxic to our wider understanding of what is a healthy, functional, ethical society, but they in and of themselves, are filling a role for those people. And I do think it's a massive issue, right? We really need to take it seriously. And I think that a lot of folks looking at that work would do well to talk to more community builders and community specialists to understand the social mechanics of what's happening.
Totally. And I think whenever these kind of questions or topics get discussed, I completely believe that not all of us immediately agree. So if any of you have a perspective, please put it down in the comment. If you have a question based on this conversation, please share with it. And I think we want to make this conversation rich and collaborative at the end. We are just 30 minutes past, and we have another 30 minutes, and I have ample lot of questions for Venessa, but I would love to have questions from the audience and make this conversation just not between me and her, while I would enjoy that, but all of you are invited to ask your questions. We will of course address them later, but please start putting your questions at this point so that some conversation can already start in the chat room. Now, Venessa, when I was thinking of this question, and I thought you are the most suited person to ask this, was also driven by the fact that probably you're one of the few community managers who has a PhD or a PhD in progress. And the value of academic rigor is something I often find missing from executive education. Now, that's a very personal opinion, and I think majority of learning spaces available for community managers are right now either inside for-profit entities or somewhere dominantly influenced by for-profit motives, like a company. I mean, imagine the difference between the current conversation in the executive space. There we are talking about community for customer support. And when we enter this space where you are situated, we talk about building governments, influencing large groups, and changing the face of civilization. So community really has that kind of substance hidden, but very less people are actually uncovering it. And do you think more of that should happen? How can we enable that? And how can we highlight that executive education is not the end? There has to be a more academic rigor to be pursued in the study of community sciences?
It's such a good question. I share that belief. And as you say, it's a personal perspective. I do think, like with most things, diversity is good here, right? I think we need both. I think purely academic focused stuff is not going to cut it. It can fall victim to a lot of the problems that academia has and has had, much as I love it and I'm a bit of a nerd, as an institution, as an institutional pillar through history, it's not usually been supportive and held the voices of non-dominant social groups, let's say. So, if you are not white, if you are not male, if you are a person of color, with rare exceptions, those sort of little academic echo chambers have been difficult to penetrate, and those sort of, that's really damaging and bad. So, and some of those sort of problems still persist, for sure. So those sort of things need to be worked on. But yes, look, the scientific method and the principles of academic study and rigor are super valuable. I mean, they obviously a different industry, but, they gave us the vaccine for COVID. This stuff, it matters. And I think that there is community, I think sometimes it's very, especially post-pandemic, or sort of not post because we're in it, but, post-COVID arrival, post-2020, community is very hot right now. And obviously many of us are aware of that. I think that's a nice thing. It's a nice renaissance. I've seen these waves come and go a lot over the years. I hope it stays, believe me. But there's a lot of opportunists and a lot of, maybe, profit or ego driven folk. And I'm not passing judgment on that, but, who will see that and go, cool, I'm getting on that bandwagon. That's where the eyeballs and the attention is right now. That's where the opportunity is. And things like that academic rigor, can help people trust that the recommendation they're getting, the advice they're getting, the tool they're using, the theory it is, whatever the thing is, has something behind it, right? And doesn't need to be, a 10-year study from the world's leading social scientists. But if it's just that, there's some interesting research, 3 or 4 papers that have been done and some community practitioners that collaborated with an academic to kind of test it out, it's got more meat and more credibility than, something I made up because I want you to attend my webinar, which might be true, but really might not be, right? And obviously there's a lot in between, but you can't also overlook the value of experience. And there are some amazing community practitioners who have, who don't have formal classic educations, who are amazing and have so much to give the space. So I think the hybrid is good. I do, my advice, I guess, would be, I'm trying to be an evangelist for the importance of the academic stuff. We've done that a little bit with ACM. It's not always popular, I think, because I am the academic nerd, and I also try to make it not about what I want. I've got to, serve my constituents properly. It's not my org, it's their org. But, I've brought in academics to the organisation. We've had an academic symposium as part of Swarm for the 10 years that it's been running, right? So amongst the industry talks, which are super practical and grounded and absolutely industry focused, we've got an academic sharing a theory that kind of connects to what that other person said. And sometimes those are really, we try to, bring in academics that are great communicators who are not going to put everybody to sleep, and make them see that this stuff's really cool, right? It's a really amazing way to think about that problem I'm facing, or, I just believe in connecting these groups. It was one of the impetuses for Swarm for me to begin with I was playing with some academics and doing stuff with them and researchers and talking to industry and practitioners. And I was sort of in both tribes. And I would hear, the practitioners say, oh, if only there was is there just a theory that could explain this? Or what does this trend mean? Or has this ever happened before? I don't know. Is it just me? And actually, there's a whole bunch of academic research that they could really use that would answer all of those questions for them. And then the academics who are here's this, what is moderation a thing? And how would that actually look in reality? I wonder if anyone does that in the world. And I'm oh, there's 400 people over here I could introduce you to actually do it, and can talk to you about all of the nuance and, the crazy challenges of that work that are really real, right? And influence and improve your work. So bringing the two together is really essential. And I also, just personally, I get dismayed a little bit sometimes. I have expressed this on social media, so if you followed me, you'll know this. I believe that the negative side of Silicon Valley discourse, and there's positive sides, absolutely, own that, but the negative stuff, which tends to make more headlines, has, for a long time now really kind of colonized and hijacked community in the community industry in some pretty negative ways and pretty destructive ways. So I think that, and that is where a lot of the industry voice comes from. Now, among that is some really great people and some great stuff, without a doubt. So I really don't mean to, kind of tarnish all of that with the same brush. But we've just got to be very discerning. And I think that's where, and a little bit of a researcher kind of mindset, just a critical mindset, right? It's not about going and getting a PhD. It's just about saying, cool, so why is that your angle on this? Like, what do you know? What's your, you don't have to be suspicious of everyone, but what's your take on this? How did you arrive at that? You know, have you seen it in the wild, or is some interesting proof you could share about that? Or just being a little bit more critical about some of those things, especially when sometimes in our gut we feel that they might not be best practicey, or they might not really serve the interests of our community, if that makes sense. You know, don't take it as gospel, right? There are plenty of thought leaders who are amazing, and there's a few that, you know, are more interested, are building the brand of a thought leader, and that's their job, and that's fine. But just to discern the two is really critical.
I want to acknowledge some of the questions coming in the chat that will definitely address them, hang around. But I just want to capitalize on this flow of conversation and take this, make a segue towards a very important question, which I feel a lot of community managers want answers for, or probably feel like asking, is the good and bad influence of Facebook and WhatsApp in the entire ecosystem. So Venessa, if you have to take Mark Zuckerberg for lunch, what would be your complaints or suggestions to him?
Oh, I'll get in trouble if I say, honestly.
It's getting recorded, Venessa. It's getting recorded.
Exactly. I can't say that. Remember I said that we have a lot of regulation in Australia?
Yes.
I can't say it. Yeah, I don't think, well, let me say this. I don't think he'd come out of that conversation unscathed. And you can just interpret that as you wish, whether that's physically or psychically or whatever. Right. Look, I think, again, you can follow me from my regular rants about Facebook. Look, I really feel like I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt for years and years and years and years and years. I really did. And we all know, or I'm pretty sure we all know, there are some good people working at Facebook trying to change things, actually plenty of them, for trying very hard to change it from the inside. It's incredibly hard because their entire business model and their entire company structure is set up to perform extractive actions and to generate harms for business. That is what it is, right? It's been proven time and time again, speaking of research from, you know, multiple whistleblowers. It's, you know, and I don't think anyone can, unless you're very in denial, can look at that and say, oh, no, I think they're trying their best. You know, I really do. Yes, some people are trying their best, but as a company, the leadership has no interest in trying their best. You know, that's it. And I think it's been incredibly destructive to not just the internet, to digital cultures, to democracy, to the planet. I really do. If I had a time machine, I would not focus on Hitler. Let's put it that way. I'm not saying I would kill anyone. I would not do that. I would not do that, to be clear. But I would somehow try to stop that thing from being invented. So, yeah, I think it's bad. But I do think, and this is a positive, right? I've got to be positive here. I think that people see it, right? It's not just a lot of us screaming into the darkness anymore about this stuff. And despite all of that, there are some community builders out there who build amazing communities on Facebook, right? Now, I believe they build it despite that, not because of that, not because it's an awesome community building platform necessarily. I think they rise above that and do the hard work regardless, right? And that's awesome. And zero judgment about any of that. But I do think they're a big problem. And I would say the same about anything that dominant, anything that pervasive, you know, it just gets really dangerous really quickly. So I think there is some big harm that they've wrought. I think they have been a colonizing force in a whole bunch of ways. They are completely unaccountable, right, to anyone. You know, I teach internet governance at university, studying, you know, internet governance institutions, governments all around the world. You know, there's virtually, I mean, they are basically untouchable, and they know it. So of course they're not going to change their ways. Why would they? There's no incentive to. So I just think people need to make their own decisions as they are about, okay, I know all that, but I'm still believe this is the best place for me and my community. Cool. Or, you know, I know all that, and therefore I'm going to build elsewhere. Fine. The good thing is the platform market is exploding. Right? It really is. It's more vibrant and dynamic than it has been in such a long time. It's reminding me more now of the early Web 2 era, where there were abundant platforms everywhere and we had a whole bunch of choice, and it was very exciting. Now they weren't very connected, right? It was very fragmented. and there was a whole bunch of inequities of access to those technologies at the time that are improved now. But it's reminding me of that in a good way. So I think the choice is out there. So my words to anyone is just, be very, we talked about ethics before, where you convene people says a great deal about who you are and your values. And it's not to say that you support what a company like Facebook does if you are on Facebook, but you are saying that there are other things that are so much more important that we do not care about that we have chosen to deprioritize that. But you've got to, again, I just don't think you can be apolitical. I saw someone tweet this afternoon, is there such a thing as an apolitical organization anymore? And I thought that was really interesting. I don't think in this day and age with so much information everywhere, we can really claim to not have a take on something. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
It does so much. And it not only answers, Venessa, I think it also inspires and put some courage on the table where a lot of us might be having similar sentiments, but we don't necessarily put them forward. And I feel so grateful to you that you have articulated in strong words about the possibilities of harm with these platforms and the need to make them accountable. I think a lot of time that conversation gets hindered because, like I said, executive education and other things have certain ecosystem implications for people because of which they're not able to take stand, not that they don't want to take a stand. So I think more and more conversation should happen. But here I want to take a pause from this and ask on behalf of some of my founder friends and people who are running startups, that when you're with all these concerns in place, whatever we have spoken so far, if I'm engaging with the prospective community manager, and I would like to emphasize in the lack of a formal education, like we as an ecosystem don't have that kind of a formal education.
Yes.
How should we vet a prospective community manager and what should we look for as a founder and business person?
Oh, that's a great question. We've got on the ACM website, there is a job template and some interview questions that are designed to help with this a little bit. There's also a couple of blog posts about this, so just to do a bit of promotion, but if you go there, you can find that. But to try to summarize it, I think, look, it does come down very much to the product or the business or the brand, right? So, first of all, you need to decide whether you want to hire a community brained person, community skilled person, or a subject matter expert. So, if you've got a gaming product, do you need someone first and foremost who absolutely lives and breathes games, and then you can gradually work with them and upskill them and let them, empower them to upskill themselves around the work of community practice? Or do you need a community person first who can learn the thing? And it's going to depend on the business. And there's pros and cons of each, right? So think about that. And then really, they have to be a great communicator in a way that resonates with the community you want to build. So if they might be an amazing formal communicator, but that's not really going to cut it for the audience and the audience you want to turn into members, to turn into super users and so on, right? You need to have someone that can be flexible communicatively and immerse and feel like they're part of this group and relate to them, who can build trust, I think is really key. You need someone that is fairly egoless, and doesn't mean they can't have ego and pride and confidence in their work, but it can't be about them. So this is where the difference between social media and community is quite important. I've known an amazing, the folks that might be an amazing influencer or someone who's built an incredible community and either audience or community around their personal brand on social media. That's definitely a skill, right? They've done something amazing, but that probably won't translate to building, say, a community of practice or a community of interest around your product necessarily, because they know themselves intimately and they've sort of they are at the center of that equation, quite rightly, because it's their personal brand. So because it's not about them, it's not about them connecting with people, it's about them connecting this person to this person and being an expert facilitator. So understanding people, being able to read people very well. I talk about this idea of digital body language. Can they sort of get a good sense of somebody from words or images or emojis on a screen? Can they get that? Do they have that intuition about people? those sort of skill sets are invaluable. And then obviously, you know, having a backbone, being pretty resilient, because they, again, depending on the role in the company, they may have to deal with a bit of crap. You know, there'll probably be governance issues somewhere along the way. You know, certainly some roles are quite confronting in that way. So, you know, it's hard work and it's slow work. So they have to realize they can't be the kind of person that thrives on instant gratification, which some aspects of social media deliver them, because community building, I find, is completely the opposite. It's a slow burn, right? You've got to be very interested in that whole ecosystem. So I don't know if that answers your question. Communication, bit of intuition about people and the kinds of people that would play well together and connect, and be able to sort of see those relationships and where they could form, the potential of those relationships, and having a really good sense of the whole of culture of what they're trying to build, you know, and, you know, being business savvy, if it's a commercial business, doesn't hurt, right? Having an idea of like how the community can collaborate and come together with the organization to produce new value generation in different ways.
I would like to take on that slowly done process and compare it with cooking. That I think there's an Indian dish called biryani, and making communities is often like creating biryani. You can't do it like fast food, and if you actually do it like fast food, you don't have a biryani. So to the people who are listening, I think that's all from my end today. We would like to take some questions from the audience right now. And if you haven't already put your questions in the chat, please put it right away. Akash, Paras, if you can help me with if I missed any questions. Right now I can see a question from Anu, which I would like to quickly read it in a gist and also add something that I have read up about your work, Venessa. Anu is asking how in tune with
if possible, because I think it's a long question and it has like a lot of meaning. Maybe Anu, if you want to just tune in quickly and share your question, like a quick one, because I think it's a long one. If you're still there. Yeah, she's there. Hi, Anu.
Hi, Venessa, I think your conversation about the legal aspect with regard to platforms and the
Sorry, I lost Anu. Is anybody else able to hear?
Anu, you're not audible.
Hi, is this better? Have you guys got me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Much better.
Yeah, so I think, Venessa, your conversation around the kind of legal aspects that a community manager might face, and I was just thinking about it because communities, of course, they exist in an online and in an offline way, but communities that are specifically running online, I'm new to the community space here, but I don't know how much of a conversation there has been around the kind of community guidelines that every platform has, which is of course different. And sometimes your community manager is also the moderator of content, the physical moderator of content, not an employee of Facebook, but all the same, the moderator of content. So I just would like to know from community folks here in India, if there is any kind of conversation or study that you all do if you're running a community which is predominantly on Facebook or on Instagram. And also in Australia, if you guys have any kind of informational capacity building, legal capacity building around this.
Yeah, do you guys want to answer first and then I'll talk to Australia?
So anybody wants to take that?
You're on mute.
Yeah. So like if you're talking about the legal guidelines and while building a community, like if I have to answer straightforward, then it's a no. Okay, like I have done it for big businesses like big MNCs also. There were no guidelines, like if I have to really tell you, and I'll not take the name of that. And then even for the smaller ones, there were no specifically the legal side of it. Maybe why I'll say that, because like it's still a new space still, and still there are no examples from our ecosystem which will set like a benchmark for other, right? Still in India, people follow Western style of community building, read Western books. None of our people have written books or something. You're getting my point? So I guess it's a lot of driven from Western, like what Venessa was saying. So I'll say like formally some legal things aren't there. Though we do sign a few things and make our smart contracts, you can see, or like little bit of norms ourselves, and then we have a deal with the founders or with the leads who are there, but that's majorly something which is there. So yeah, that's the take from my side, and that's on my knowledge as well, like, you know, by talking and working around things. Maybe there could be other people who are working in some formal organization building a brand community, and maybe they have set up some sides of this, so possibly they can add on. Else, Vanessa, you are good to go.
Yeah, so here it's a really good question, Anu, and I've just connected with you on LinkedIn. In Australia, it's pretty well understood by most organizations, but not all, because it's still about access and equality, right? So if I'm a tiny little business who has bad internet connectivity and no time to, you know, catch up on the latest government rules for things, I'm not going to know what I'm meant to do necessarily. But big businesses in particular are very aware of this. All online communities in Australia have their own guidelines, separate from platform guidelines. Some of them are very, you know, one sentence, like don't be an idiot, and others are massive and very comprehensive. We have a lot of not-for-profit communities here online, a lot in the mental health space and the therapeutic space. So communities like Beyond Blue, SANE, Reach Out, communities where people deal with complex mental health issues online. So they, as you might expect, have very nuanced guidelines, very, very nuanced guidelines, and big teams of professional moderators and clinicians that work with them as well. So it's pretty common for everyone to have community guidelines of some kind, and most, you know, not most, some understand their legal responsibilities. And I guess ACM, part of what ACM does is we don't really take a position on whether it's good or bad, but if something becomes a law, then we will go and tell people building communities, hey, this is a thing you need to know. Here's a briefing on it. Here's our advice on how to actually get it done in a way that makes sense for your community. And if you have questions, let us know. So we're not a legal organization, but we do know lawyers we can connect you to. Does that answer your question?
Anu?
Yeah. No, I think it's just a thought that I've had in mind, and maybe something to chat with Sangeeta and some of the others here. If maybe it is important for people here to also figure out what the legals is and what the platform rules also are, because in a sense, you can report something as abuse to Facebook, but Facebook may actually protect that under what they consider free speech. Yeah. But if we have a community that is, let's say, discussing gender violence, then somebody saying something which Facebook might consider okay and may not take down, we may want to consider. But also, I mean, India is also a situation where people are getting picked up by the cops for all kinds of things. So maybe that's a conversation that we should also have here. But that's all I want to say.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love that for you.
Sorry. Absolutely.
Sorry.
Okay, so I think what Anu has highlighted is very important and overall, but my personal take also is to have a reality check that we are at a stage where we don't even have the right job descriptions in the community space.
Absolutely.
And
that's right.
I hate to admit this. I mean, it's very important what Anu is highlighting, and we should reach there. But the current position is people don't get the job descriptions right. So let's take it step by step. And but because we have touched upon the guidelines question, Vanessa, you have a very particular insight about the difference between a community constitution and community guidelines. I think it would be very beneficial for people to understand how does a community guideline differ from a community constitution.
Yeah, sure. So a guidelines is something that is created by the person that runs a community or by the organization that runs the community, right? So if I'm the community manager of something, I would probably draft or create on behalf of my organization to run the community. It's usually something people have to hit with their onboarding, right? And they have to agree to in some way. They're just like terms of service, right? Most people don't read them. We know this, especially if you have a very low barrier to entry, which is not a good idea for most communities anyway, because that's a lot of unqualified members in various ways. Community constitutions are this idea that it's less guidelines, more social contract that everyone agrees to sign up to, and it's something that is co-created by the members. So you already need a group of founding members, basically a small group. So you might take everyone that's in community folks right now, knowing that you'll grow bigger in the future, and you all will work together on a project. Might start with a small group and then you involve other groups as you go along and workshop it together. So it's a co-creation process that ends up with something that's a bit like a guidelines document, but it says this is who we are, this is what we stand for, these are the values we uphold when we're participating in this community. Here's what we don't tolerate and accept, and here's how it connects to who we are. And it can say anything you like, right? It can list out behaviors, it can talk about mechanisms of enforcement, but it's something you will come up with together rather than the organization or the community manager, community professional making the list and making it top down. Now, it's not appropriate for every community to do that. If I'm hired to go and build out and run a massive gaming forum of 2 million people for you know, some massive gaming company tomorrow, Epic Games, you can imagine I'm not exactly going to have a success trying to build a community constitution with 2 million gamers. That's going to be hilarious. But if there's a new community, or if there's particularly communities of purpose and practice lend themselves very well to this, you can absolutely do it, right? You can find those first members, and you need to reinforce it consistently though, like with all moderation. You can't put it there and forget about it. You've got to keep coming back to it. If there are issues or infractions or people break rules, you've got to call that out and explain why and reconnect it back to the guidelines, use it as an opportunity to remind people of the social contract they all signed up for. So Lauren Vargas, who some of you may know, she's also based in Amsterdam, Inga. She's originally from the US, but she's amazing. She one of my regular guests at Swarm. She speaks a lot about participatory governance and constitutive stuff like this, if you're interested in learning more.
Lovely. And I think yeah, Paris.
Sorry for being that person, but I'm saying people, we're gonna get a picture click. So like, you know, after this question, so giving you a time to whatever you want to do with your face, and but come back with an open camera. And I guess that's how we pay our tribute and thanks to these two people and the team who has made this happen. So let's get a good photograph clicked. At least that's the only option. And yeah, go ahead.
I think the question from Mike was left and Venessa has responded for taking it offline, but I would take the opportunity from that question to understand. Venessa, give us a overview of where is AI and community right now? Like, what should be our expectation from AI and what shouldn't we expect from AI?
Look, much like Web3, there's a lot of hype and not a lot of substance, I will say, just to be real. There is some cool stuff happening, and it's not going to be long before it gets a lot cooler. So it's going interesting places, but you know, your jobs are not in danger. Let's put it that way. Any kind of low-hanging fruit tasks in a community, so repetitive moderation, so deleting spam, that sort of stuff. You know, the assigning of points in karma systems, sort of low-level matchmaking, sort of looking at, you know, looking at something in someone's profile and noticing that they're in a certain occupation and having a bot or an automated agent like a bot say, hey, you might want to meet this person. They also do that job. Those sort of low-level tasks within communities can be handled by AI and are particular. So own platforms are investing a lot in AI. The only AI that you're going to find on social media is the AI that serves the social media company. And sometimes that's cool and fun to play with, but usually it serves their interests, not community builders. So own platforms is really where you need to be if you want to start doing interesting things with this. But where I'm seeing it applied really well is things like onboarding, particularly at scale where you don't have the capacity to do that personal touch anymore, where it can really create beautiful experiences. I mean, even something like Discourse's Disco bot, which has been around for a while now, is a phenomenal little AI tool, right? And that's automation doing what it should. Totally configurable and allows you to kind of create a really nice onboarding experience to the community. I see really interesting things ahead though. There are some interesting experiments happening around using, again, in summary, basically, you know, where AI can do its coolest stuff in the world is where it has masses of data. Most communities are not that big. Most communities do not have the kind of buckets of data that are going to lead to the really awesome application of things like machine learning. So if you've got communities the size of Reddit, then you could do amazing things with AI. Machine learning in particular is obviously one aspect of it. For the rest of us, automation, simple algorithms can be really useful in helping alleviate repetitive burden, helping us do simple matchmaking, helping with onboarding, helping with moderation. But there is interesting things to come. I was just trying to find a post I wrote about this a while ago that probably does a better job of summarizing it than I can right now. I'll go share it. and it might be more useful for you, Mike. Sorry if that was not helpful.
No, it is. It is. I think all of us would agree, and I think it's so important to be very pragmatic while thinking about these things rather than following the buzz around and the hype around. So thank you for that, and I think with Paras's commandment, we can be ready for the picture right now, and with that we'll officially close today's conversation as well. But feel free to connect with each other. I think it's very important that we remain connected. We are in the business of connections, but we should also be connected to each other. And I feel like community is the business of connections, essentially. So we should first do that. So with that, I think let's take a picture as a symbol of our connections today.
Awesome.
Yes, absolutely. The
Can I
favorite
get
part
everyone's
of the
camera,
event.
please?
Who's going to say cheese? Or what?
See, I gave
India?
such a monologue, and still people are not turning on the camera. See.
Arun,
Yash,
Sangeeta, Karan.
Pratiksha, Nilesh.
Yeah.
Come on, guys. Come on. Do it.
Any of that, everyone?
Better. Somebody
You see so many familiar faces.
Jay.
And Jay is a little bit well, so he has just already told. So I told him, like, he can't be sick. His community needs him. So get better. Who's Karan? You there? Nilesh?
Pratiksha.
Quick one, and let's just do it. Good to see you, Yash. Hi, Shweta.
Hi, guys.
Everyone.
Do feel free to connect with me if you want to chat about any of these things. I love chatting with you. I've got so much to learn from all of you as well. So, what you're doing is amazing. So please connect. I want to talk to you about coming and joining us at Swarm. I want to chat about all the things. So don't hesitate to reach out if you want to go deeper into any of these topics.
Lovely. Thank you, Vanessa. Let's do the click. It's okay. It's all right, people. We'll just put your selfies on it. So, what? Who's clicking? Akash, you clicking?
Okay. Yeah, I'll take the image in 3, 2, 1. Everyone smile.
Thank you so much. And before we leave, I think I want to make that announcement on behalf of Chronicles of Community Builders that in this time of fever around, there is only one fever you can look up to. That's Richard Millington from Fever B. Do catch that fever in the next edition. All other fevers are bad. So check out the LinkedIn page and the Facebook page. And I think all of us know what interesting conversation it is going to be. So do come for that. And let's keep having these conversations and fill in for a lot of things that I think nobody else is going to do for us. We have to do it for ourselves.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much.
And big thanks, Vanessa. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Your work matters a lot.
And everyone who has been coming even regularly, folks like Vineet, Arun, and Yash. I guess these people are coming. Then I see Tamanna, Nilesh is there. So yeah, Pratiksha has come late. So I guess you guys are awesome. Thank you for coming again and again. This is something every community needs. And thank you so much, Manohar. You just rock with the last statement of Fever V. So I just love that. I told everyone you're gonna kill it. So I think it's crazy. Thank you, Akash. Thank you, everyone. And have a great day, night, evening, whatever, year. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.